Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Joining us now from our Abuja studios to speak on the process, parties, and actors in the upcoming supplementary election is the Vice Chancellor of Baze University and former Director General of the Nigerian Law School, Professor Tahir Mamman. Welcome to the morning show, Prof.
Thank you. Good morning.
Yes, Prof. I hope you are hearing me very clearly. After the second round of election, the governorship and the House of Assembly election, now what has come out clearly and prominent is the number of inconclusive elections in 6 states. For a start, INEC is saying we should count it as a blessing because politicians are no longer writing results. But others are saying that perhaps we have a lot of gaps in the system because through the supplementary election, the will of the people can be distorted. What is your take, Prof?
Well, thank you once more for having me. I honestly don't see how the will of the people will be distorted. In the first place, what is noticeable in it is the competitive nature of the election itself. That is what has led to inconclusive elections. It means one of the parties or none of the parties had been able to convincingly win the elections, and therefore it became important for the elections to be concluded fairly by giving every voter in that constituency the right to exercise his franchise. And there are many reasons which could lead to that. I believe most of which will be things beyond the control of the voters. So if there was violence, for instance, or there was overvoting or some of the malpractices which have led to cancellation of votes here and there, then certainly it is appropriate that the voters are given the opportunity to exercise their franchise to determine who will be their leader. And there's no particular advantage conferred on any party. Obviously, those who are in leadership position will make the argument, look, we already have majority. But what about those voters out there who have not had the opportunity to exercise their votes? So the advantage is still trying to discover or give voters opportunity to exercise their votes. And the principle which INEC it's governed by is what they call margin of lead, which is embedded in the Electoral Act itself. And I've had arguments by people that in the case of the governorship, okay, Section 179(2) of the Constitution has already solved that problem by simply saying a candidate who has majority of the votes and then has made the other requirements of spread is entitled to be returned. But the point is, these votes are determined by voters. So if there are voters out there who have not exercised their ballot, then they are entitled to participate and given the opportunity to participate and determine the final outcome of the election. So by disenfranchising them, by simply announcing the result when actually there is a huge number of people out there who can make a difference to the outcome, that will not be fair and that will not be constitutional. So INEC is well grounded in its position and in law, the Constitution and the Electoral Act.
Okay, Prof, since we're talking about constitutionality, let's turn our attention to Rivers State. Elections were held on Saturday and then suspended. Up until now, even the fact-finding committee set up, we don't know if that report has been submitted. We don't know what the outcome is. People of Rivers State do not know up until now what their votes have said on Saturday. Is that constitutional?
Very well. The case of Rivers is a bit unfortunate, actually. That's a state where the environment for elections have been very toxic, have been problematic. And by Section 26 of the Electoral Act, where the environment is not quite secure, INEC is entitled to postpone an election and then set another date for that. Now, there have been various complaints about even the way some of the results, elections that have taken place, the environment within which they took place. And so INEC is entitled to look at that. If it is actually affected by a lot of substantial irregularities, and then absence of peace and security to conduct the elections under Section 26 is entitled to look at that with a view to finding ways and means of ensuring that they can create a suitable environment, working with the stakeholders to have a run if they have to, or even find out, ascertain if the elections actually which took place there were done properly, substantially in line with the Electoral Act, and the votes were actually legitimately, conducted and obtained.
All right, Professor Tahir, since we're in River State, one of the things that has actually caused a lot of fuss in River State has been militarization of this election. Looking at it generally in Nigeria, especially River State, what's your take about the military's involvement in general elections?
Well, we know as a matter of fact, as a matter of law, that military, especially the Army, Air Force, and that segment of the military, do not have a direct role in the conduct of elections. And however, the way our people, the politicians and the actors have conducted themselves, in particular in River State, is such that, such as to have militarized the environment within which elections have been taking place in that place. And that being the case, the INEC and the government have a duty to secure the environment, to ensure that people who will come out to vote, can come out to vote without fear. There is no threat to the lives of voters. There's no threat to the life of election officials. There's no threat to the life of monitors and every person who is out there to exercise his civic duties and responsibilities. This is a duty of the state. And if that cannot be carried out by the police alone or civil defense alone, certainly the military have a duty to hang around, find a way of being around, not necessarily by being in the ballot paper, because even by the act, they are not supposed to be, they are supposed to be keeping some distance, about 300 meters from the voting area. So they have a duty. And you recall also that even the military people there, some of them were shot and killed at some point along the way. And this is a state where over 20 people have been killed. And so it's a very sad environment that we have in River State. And therefore, it is appropriate that sufficient military are deployed to ensure that the situation is, some normalcy and calmness is restored to the situation so that people can actually exercise their civil rights and duties within a very suitable environment.
All right, Professor Mamman, some people would have actually argued that the military might have made the situation worse than better. With the power of hindsight, do you think it was the right call to have involved the military to this extent in the elections?
Well, certain areas of the country have a history, remember. And River State is on top in terms of that state where there have always been a lot of bloodshed and there's a lot of ego trip on the part of the actors, brinkmanship, and then, this resort to violence, and so it is in anticipation of that kind of situation, I believe, that the military were made to be present, not necessarily because they needed to be drafted into the elections proper. No, not at all. I mean, if you look at the rest of the country, you know, you don't even notice the presence of the military at all. So it's what we call catch-22. If the military are not there will be violence, there will be ballot snatching, there will be killings all over the place. And so, as I said, they need to be there to really secure the environment. And if nothing happens, if nobody draws them into acting, I don't see how the military on their own, you know, will go to any area, will go to any setting and arrest people or even fire any shot at anybody. So we have a duty, the political actors have a duty to ensure that they do not militarize the environment by having all these thugs, all these boys all over the place.
Now, Prof, we've had the political campaigns. The politicians have now become quiet. Then the spotlight was put on INEC to conduct the elections, and now it's over to the judiciary. This is the season of election petitions. There have been a variety of actions all over the country. River State APC is going to the Supreme Court later on in the month. Adamawa, somebody is trying to stop the supplementary elections there. And of course, the presidential election petition tribunal, where PDP's candidate, Atiku Abubakar, is going for legal redress. What are his chances? Bearing in mind that in recent times, the judiciary has come under great scrutiny from the public because of the suspension of the Chief Justice of Nigeria, Walter Onnoghen, and his replacement with the acting CJN, Justice Tanko Mohammed. There's a perception in the country that Atiku Abubakar's foray to PEPT is an exercise in futility. What are his chances of a fair hearing with all the political considerations?
Well, thank you. Elections in Nigeria go through 3 cycles, actually. The primary stage, organized by the parties with INEC monitoring, and then the elections properly, which we've had, and then now the courts and the election tribunals. And every phase has its own crisis, you know, which including the primaries. Remember, a lot of the problems even we have in Rivers actually has its roots from the primaries, both within APC itself and then the other parties are now between amongst the various parties. Now, it is, let me put it this way, it is legitimate. It's a legitimate thing to do for people who are aggrieved, candidates who have lost or who feel they were unfairly defeated, to go to court and seek redress. And that's a proper way to go. What is a problem is the attempts to suck the courts, even to rubbish some of the tribunals and the courts before even they have started sitting. You know, I've read in the papers and even heard on the television some of the media campaign against some of the judges, members of the tribunal, and it is very unfair. You know, politicians should allow our institutions to do their work. And after all, they have appeal stages, appeals at various stages. So they should just get their counsel, do the needful. They have access to all the election materials, from the polling units to the declarations. You know, so even the act makes it mandatory for the electoral commissioners to make available all these materials to them. So there's no, they should simply do the needful, be diligent, and do their work properly, and then stop attacking members of the judiciary, and then even that's publicly. And then, as we have had to in many cases, the politicians should also stop approaching tribunal members. You know, so they should stop approaching judges. Let them, allow them to do their work. You know, so we don't have to bring in money into everything. We don't want to. We don't have to pollute every aspect of our lives as the political actors seem to be wanting to do, and it's very unfair. But it's my belief that the courts have, over the years, strengthened themselves. And yes, there have been cases of complaint here and there, but that's the way of things are in Nigeria. But we are gradually sanitizing our political system, and the courts have done a great job, actually, in sanitizing the political system right from the primary stage. Even the Electoral Act and the Constitution, a lot of the amendments in those two laws are on the basis of arose from decisions of the courts in trying to sort out the problems of the political parties. So to me, every candidate who is going to court will have a fair chance. I don't see any reason why to doubt that our courts are going to deliver justice in these matters. So they should just sit back, do the needful, and be diligent. That's all they need to do.
Okay, Prof, I just want to take you back to this inconclusive election and the supplementary election coming up. Now, I mentioned the issue of distorting the people's will. If we take the Osun supplementary election as a case study, you discover that an opportunity was presented for the ruling party at the center to go into an alliance with one of the parties that contested in that election. This is supposed to be a supplementary election, not a runoff, where the top two candidates did not meet the constitutional requirements. Then also, we have in Nigerian politics, we cannot deny the factor, what they call a federal might, where the federal might is deployed to a small space to swing the election perhaps in one direction. And in the case of the Osun election, during the supplementary election, there were complaints of security agencies preventing people, stopping people. So don't you think that people in the states where this supplementary election will take place, where some politicians are already expressing fears that these factors may distort the people's will at the end of the day?
Well, it is legitimate to be concerned about external interference in the polls. It's very legitimate for people to exercise their concerns. But if you notice the trend in these 2019 elections, federal might have not played much role. Out of the 6 states outstanding at the moment, 4 of them are states whose party is ruling at the center. And I think most of them are even behind in those states. So you will see that, I mean, for God's sake, who would have imagined, for instance, that Kano will be struggling to deliver a government for APC. So to some extent, voters of Nigeria have to some extent matured. They've been able to pick and choose amongst the parties and candidates. And yes, if parties at that stage decide to come together, informally, because it's not a formal alliance, it's a question of people now forging some kind of understanding as to how the result they want. That cannot be stopped. It is quite, to me, not out of order at all. And so it is up to the candidate to approach other parties, other players in the terrain, in the setup, and see if they can work together. But it's not a formal thing which they have to go to INEC for, and then which will affect their identity. No, this is something informal which cannot be stopped, and to me, which is even legitimate, actually. Because the truth of the matter is that in all the elections that we have seen, the contests have been essentially between 2 parties, in all the states and even at the federal, as we saw. So if the setting at the state level is the parties identify, the smaller parties, identify partners out of the bigger ones, it is quite appropriate. I don't see any distortion of the people's will there. After all, even the voters who are going to vote for those smaller parties are also entitled to their franchise. They're entitled to vote. So nobody's vote is being distorted here. So it's just a question of, political parties really always finding something to complain about. I don't see any problem with that.
But Prof, you seem to have also touched on the basis of the fear of others, because the ruling party, the party at the center, are behind it 5 of the 6 states. And with some movements here and there, they are looking at it, the possibility of federal might being deployed into a small space, perhaps to swing it their way. That's the basis of the fear of the main opposition.
Well, when we say federal might, I really don't know what we mean here. Are they going to send in soldiers, police, and then overwhelm people? You know, the problem with this kind of thing is that when people move in, how do you identify the voters for each party? See, you wouldn't know. And cities and towns and villages, essentially, yes, there may be a few places here and there where people can say, well, this particular area, there seem to be more supporters of APC or PDP there and that sort of thing. But overall, you discover that people are mixed up. So it is in everybody's interest to simple go in, focus on the voters. You know, that's what they should be focusing on. While, of course, as I said at the beginning, if people have fears, it's appropriate to voice it out so that you now put people on their toes to really guard against any potential interference. But the most important thing is that parties should go after the voters. They should, deliver their message. They should tell those voters out there why they should be elected, why they should be entrusted with power. That is the most important thing. Not to be whining about what other parties are doing. Obviously, everybody is strategizing. So if you have somebody at the center, if your party is at the center, yes, it's an advantage. It's that mandate was given by the voters, so you can't take that away if they want to use that to advantage, as long as the tool they employ is a legitimate one. It's only if they decide to arm twist, INEC, or use the military. This is where really we have every reason, every citizen of Nigeria have a right to voice out their concern. But if it is a party at the federal level and they wish to use their leverage legitimately, I don't think there's any problem with that.
Prof, let's look at the just concluded elections. We've seen the lowest voter turnout in recent history, the highest number of inconclusive elections, militarization of the process, alleged sabotage of INEC staff, vandalism, especially with INEC installations, vote buying, brazen act of the political class. But what does all of this say about Nigeria's commitment to credible elections and democracy?
I agree with you entirely. These are extremely very serious concerns which every citizen of Nigeria really have to voice out against. We are entitled, every Nigerian is entitled to have free, fair, and credible elections. Now, all those vices you've mentioned, they undermine the credibility of our democratic process, and they do not help to grow our constitutionalism. But, where I always put that blame squarely is on the political actors. They are the ones responsible for all this that we are in. Right from the primaries, from the organization, the way they organize primaries, the acrimony which arose from that, the attempts by so-called godfathers to impose particular candidates on people. And we've seen the outcome out there. Most of the candidates who are imposed on the electorate were rejected everywhere. So the parties and those who are managing them have a duty to learn from this process, I hope. And you remember when the PC had its primaries with the imposition of members into the National Assembly, all over the place, most of these candidates have been rejected. So these are some of the things which are affecting our development, the development of our democracy. And look at the river that we're talking about. The simple reason for all this is people wanting to use force to impose themselves on the electorate instead of allowing the electorate to determine whether they want them to continue as their leaders or they want to bring in another person as their leaders. So politicians, political actors, and their major backers have a duty to ensure that they support this democracy. They do not do things which undermine our ability to organize free and fair elections. INEC has been struggling to contend with the vices which are manifested by our politicians. Those things all over the world in mature democracies, you don't even hear about INEC. What we see are the faces of voters and then the results being collated. But in our own situation, what you see is military, the last week of our elections, it was when in a war zone. It was like we're going to war. Everything that we were talking about was the military, how to security, you know. So these are things which we just have to attend to as a country and as citizens of Nigeria.
All right, Professor. A lot of people might not exonerate INEC in this particular equation, saying that it is the duty to help protect their vote, right, and not have their vote either subverted, subjugated, or even subdued, as the case may be. What can INEC do to ensure that they restore confidence in the heart of voters? Because what we have seen from this election is that the people do not believe that their votes count. They would rather have PVCs to use as a means of identification, or rather than a tool to change and foster democracy.
Well, as I said at the beginning, INEC has a duty. It's established to ensure that voters are, permitted, or they create the necessary environment for voters to vote. And where INEC has had problem has to do with the logistics in terms of delivery of materials and delivering them in good time, and then also in terms of some of his officials, being seen to be fair. I've received reports in some states where some of the officials have been found wanting here and there. But overall, to me, given the environment within which INEC has been operating, I think they've done quite a good job. That's my own personal assessment. They can do better, certainly, but we've given INEC too much responsibility. They have, under the law, the present scheme, security people are supposed to account to them when we know that security people will not account to INEC. I can't imagine the GOC of a brigade, making a report to INEC on day-to-day logistics of his men. The same thing with the commissioner of police. But we also have the problem of terrain, which is physical terrain, which is like in Bayelsa and the rivers, which are things, natural restrictions in movement of people and information and logistics. So these are some of the objective challenges which INEC is grappling with. And then when we come to the issue of corruption, by and large, yes, we can say, well, the officials ought to exercise some restraint and be impeccable, be honest. INEC should do everything possible to ensure that they select people who can evince some honesty in their dealings. But I tell you, the first offering is usually from the politicians. They are the ones who will approach INEC. I don't see an INEC officer sitting in his office or wherever simply placing a call to an official, to a candidate or to a political party asking for money. That offer will come from the parties and the candidates and their supporters. That has to be stopped. This is where the main problem is. Just yesterday, somebody was telling me, just to even get some of these INECs to participate in the run, they had to offer some money to approach the commission in that particular state with something. Why do they have to approach the commission? It's not their duty to take money to them. It's not. They shouldn't do that at all. So by and large, I keep on emphasizing that the larger problem has to do with the actors who are very desperate, and do not, have the responsibility and the patience to go through legitimate methods. For them, that one is not assuring. So instead, they prefer to cut corners using either force or money. And this is where our attention has to focus on. While at the same time, we keep encouraging INEC to do the needful, to plug all the errors. Even the smart card that we have, it is not completely free of manipulation in terms of technology. So these are things that we can continue to grow. and get INEC to find a befitting gadget where we can transmit some data, maybe directly from the polling units to the state, instead of going through various multifaceted coalition system that is now open to some kind of interference. So these are things we can apply ourselves to. But the most important problem and the most dangerous one is the attitude of the politicians who do not want to follow legitimate processes in trying to secure the mandate of the electorate.
Prof, you just referred to the most dangerous problem and the desperation of some of the actors. And one of the ways that INEC is trying to address this is by withholding certificates of return where they find or they feel that electoral malpractice has occurred. So there are two examples that are quite notable. Rochas Okorocha, the governor of Imo State, who won his Senate seat of Imo West, and it's been withheld because of charges that he had the resident electoral commissioner declare him under duress. And there's also Chris Ekpeyong, who won in Northwest Akwa Ibom senatorial seat, but that was court-ordered. Now, is there a distinction between the two, what the withholding of certificates by a court or withholding by INEC? Which one has more legal bite? And what should INEC do going forward? Does INEC need to involve the courts? Because somebody like Governor Rochas Okorocha is resisting and arguing his case because it's not been ordered by a court. So does that undermine the efficiency of what INEC is trying to achieve here? And do you think that as a measure, this withholding of certificates can be effective in the future?
I think we need to applaud INEC for taking some of these decisions. It means INEC is determined to ensure that only legitimate votes count. Remember, the law provides that only returns made from legitimate votes are recognized. Now, for God's sake, why would somebody went and go and secure a return through duress, through a gun at the head of somebody? You know, this is very suggestive, without even further evidence. It clearly demonstrates that the person knows that he has not won. Because if he won, the proper place to go to is the court, is the tribunal. If you allege that, okay, you won, but INEC is withholding, you go to the tribunal, you know, because ultimately it will not be given to the wrong person or a person who didn't win through lawful votes. You know, so the proper thing to do is to go to a tribunal. So INEC is right. It is appropriate for INEC to withhold the issuance of certificate in that case. And where, however, a return has been, declarations and return have been made, as in that case, yeah, somebody can go to court. And the courts are empowered, obviously, to intervene as they did in Akwa Ibom, or Akwa Ibom in the case of Ekpeyong. So both, yes, Akwa Ibom. So both institutions are entitled to exercise those rights they did, those decisions they did. And obviously, I believe INEC is going to study what happened in the case of Okorocha, including the entire election process itself. If the election is not appropriate, it will simply not recognize it, and it can order for fresh elections to take place in that place, unless a return has been made, in which case, if a return has been made, then only the courts can now make further declaration on it, not INEC any further. But they are entitled to hold the certificate.
Okay, Prof. Looking at the legislation, the Electoral Act, the Electoral Act Amendment Bill was not signed by the President on 4 occasions. And yesterday, at the presentation of certificates to National Assembly members, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu asked the incoming legislators to make the passing of the Electoral Act Amendment a priority. what do you have to say? Because there are many who believe that perhaps if the president had signed the amendment bill into law, some of the shortcomings we saw in these elections would have been avoided.
Well, the way human nature is, there's always room for improvement in everything that we do. And however, in the case of the Nigerian system and Nigerian environment, and any environment for that matter, actually, there's a limit to how far you can legislate human conduct. We have a constitution and an electoral act which is very comprehensive and detailed in their provisions. And in any sane place where people recognize basic benchmarks of good behavior and good conduct, you know, what we have in those two documents are enough to govern our election affairs. But for us in Nigeria, we try to be one step ahead of our laws, or we try to ensure that even what is in that law is not implemented or is undermined. This is the situation we've been having. Now, I remember there are a number of things which the president mentioned, but the one that usually is being highlighted is the electronic transmission of the results. And I tell you, this is a recipe for huge problem for us as a country. Because right now, even in the present system that we have, INEC, the presiding officers are required to transmit results from polling units to the coalition centers electronically, in addition to the physical transmission which they have. Now, I haven't heard that being done, or if it is done, I haven't heard how that have facilitated the work of INEC at the coalition level. That's why even for governors, you know, the period taken for collecting results and declaration was even more than what they did for the president. You know, it shouldn't be so. If an election took place on a Saturday, there's no reason why by evening of that Saturday, at worst, by morning of Sunday, election should not be declared. Okay? But the problem is, we know the problem of hacking of data transmitted electronically all over the world. Remember what is happening in America now. For the last 3 years or 2 years now, since Trump has been in office, he's been bedeviled. His government has been bedeviled by allegations of hacking and attempt by Russia to influence the outcome of elections in America. And even more recently, there was also a discussion in respect of Estonia, you know, that adopted digital election system where voters can just go the way we go to an ATM machine here and then do their voting and go home without even anybody noticing that the election is going on. But what happened? A week before that, the election date, there was a massive hacking of their system. So they recoil away from that. So a lot of times we tend to see solution to our problems in things which will throw up more problems for us, rather than simply making use of what we have to make it efficient and then to regulate our conduct and simply do the right thing, believe in doing the right thing. That's what is lacking in us. People just simply don't want to do the right thing. And there's a limit to how far you can check, as I said. You know, people's misconduct, once they are not determined, once people are determined to break the law. So this is where the problem is.
Okay, Prof. I just want to take you up on this because you mentioned electronic transmission of results, which was embedded in the Electoral Amendment Bill. Now, INEC said before the election that yes, they are using it, but for just as a trial, because it is not in the law, they are not using it to collate results, but they are doing it as a trial on their own. But the way you have spoken, you seem to be against even deployment of more technologies. The American system you mentioned, I think what happened in America, not that Russia broke into their database, but using social media to influence the voters by way of putting adverts from America as if the Americans putting those adverts to campaign for a particular candidate. That's it. So if you seem to have spoken so much against deployment of technology from what you have just said, because we believe that technology all over the world, yes, hacking is possible, but there is also cyber security, which is a field of study on its own. I'm sure you know that, sir.
Well, why at the moment INEC is able to do what they are doing is that it is not a requirement. So it will not attract the attention of anybody because it's not a process through which, authorized process through which they are supposed to collect results. Now, by the time you make it compulsory, and it is now the instrument through which you will transmit or results will be transmitted from units to the INEC headquarters, I can tell you, I can assure you, the experts will not come in immediately. And actually, even in our own case, you know, it was even in the media shortly before the election that some of the candidates actually had discussions with some Russians on how to, you know, access INEC data. I remember even in 2015, even INEC itself admitted that their data was accessed, you know. So, but at that time, it was supposed to be used for, they did it to monitor if INEC was going to interfere with the results. Now, the flip side of that is that somebody was able to access their data, their system. Now, if that person has a different motive, it means he will be able to interfere and tamper with it to his favor or to the favor of, in favor of the party that he wants to be the beneficiary of the intrusion. And I tell you something. The Nigerian Bar Association adopted a sort of electronic mode of elections. And the last two elections, especially the first one when that system was introduced, all lawyers in the country noticed. And we all knew that that election was interfered with. At the point the results were coming in, people were all there monitoring the performance of the candidates from the information that we got, and then paring them away, whereas one particular candidate was seen to be was generating more votes. They were not interfering it away, interfering with it to make sure that there were less votes going to that particular candidate. So these are the things that we are talking about. I remember we talk about all this IT because you and I are here in Abuja, state capital, and here and there. How many voters have access to the kind of IT we are talking about? All these people in the rural places, do they have access to it? They don't have. They don't even have land, they don't have anything. So who are we going to make these laws for? Where substantial number of our population, they live in rural areas, they have no access to anything, they cannot even charge their handsets or whatever it is. So it is there's still a lot of, I'm not completely discounting, but I'm saying we should be very careful in adopting things which we are not prepared for, or which our environment is not suitable for, or which our environment will even undermine its performance. This is just my major fear. And you can imagine after all the results, for instance, of a presidential election have been collated, okay, and then something happens to it in the INEC headquarters. You can imagine, you know, the crisis you throw the whole country into. It's no longer isolated places that as we are having now. you know, maybe a few states here and there, or some polling units in some states. We will now be talking about the whole country, because the whole country is the constituency for presidential election. So where do you start? So it's something that we need to be very careful in adopting what we really eventually bring the country down. That's just my fear.
Okay, Prof, let me take you on something you said earlier. You said INEC takes too much responsibility in conducting elections in Nigeria. So would you back the call and the move by the lawmakers seeking to amend the electoral law to limit the powers of INEC? In fact, the majority leader, Femi Gbajabiamila, is seeking to amend the law in a way that INEC no longer has the powers. He's moving. The INEC no longer has the powers to declare elections inconclusive. He says that should be a thing of the past.
Well, they are lawmakers. They are entitled to propose bills which they feel will help advance the cause of democracy. But as I keep on saying, they are the ones causing all these problems for us. I agree entirely that INEC have been saddled with too much responsibilities. If you take one, for instance, voters' education, you know, this shouldn't be a responsibility for INEC. We have the national organization, NOA, Nigerian Orientation Agency, they are all there. And a number of other agencies should be given the duty. And their parties too, they have a duty to, you know, sell what they stand for, what their programs are to the electorate. It is they who will now energize and bring out the voters. It's not really the job of INEC. And, but where the problem is, ordinarily, if you take the US, elections are conducted by the states. We don't have really the national body, which is not responsible for conducting all the states the way we do it in Nigeria. You know, but we know what happens in this country. When states conduct even state elections into local governments, as we have been seeing, no opposition party has ever won in any state. So these are all units in the governor's office. So nobody can depend on them to give free and fair elections. So we need to be very careful. Yes, we agree. We need to have a serious study on what things can be taken away from INEC. But again, that has to be done within the context of our environment, within the setting within which we're operating. Because if we were developed to some level, for instance, you know, the voters card which we are using, you know, the smart card which we are using, do not have to be manufactured from abroad. These are things which our companies here should be able to produce for us. Just those companies that produce meter. After all, what is a smart card? It's just a sort of a meter. So they should be able to produce it. These are things which we should be working towards instead of relying for, you know, and enriching companies overseas. So we can have serious conversation. We can set up a committee or whatever it is to look at what things can be left with INEC, and one thing other agencies can be done. But that has to be carefully done, because as I keep on repeating, the Nigerian environment is unique. Our politicians are a bit unique. You know, these are people who do not recognize benchmarks of behavior. So everything that we do, we have to take into account this. They set their goals on their minds on the goal, and that is it. How they go about it is not there. They're prepared to sacrifice anything, anybody, and everything. So this is the kind of system we have.
Professor Mamman, as we try to wrap it up, since you've actually mentioned that the political actors are bent on subverting and also trying to contravene the laws or trying to manipulate the system, with that particular knowledge, shouldn't that inform how we go about it? Because you're almost saying we should actually just give up on the process. How can we make this process better, knowing that political actors will be desperate? knowing that the electronic system might be hacked, how can we make the system better and elections better, that we can have a sharp improvement from what we've seen in this election when we hold our next elections?
Well, I think what we're trying to do here is to look at where the major problems are. But as I said at the beginning, we've made incremental progress since we started in 1999. Certainly, no keen observer of Nigerian constitutionalism and democracy will fail to admit that. Through the works of INEC itself, through the commitment on the part of government in years past, as you mentioned earlier on, any party that is in control of the center will almost ram through every state to make sure that they deliver all their parties. We've seen it in 1983, we've seen some of this in 1979, but incrementally, these institutions have been growing. And the Nigerians have also been demonstrating some level of maturity, particularly from 2015. So we are gaining a lot of grounds. And, but what we are saying is that we have to keep an eye on things which are still pulling us down, which are still pulling us back in this process, in this journey. And these are the parties. The parties are actually the number one problem, number one institutions around which most of the problems we are talking about revolve. If they can organize, and they have to be, INEC, again, we're coming back to INEC, we have to ensure that parties organize credible primaries. Once they're able to organize credible primaries and throw up good candidates for the electorate, this is what is needed. Well, right now, they are not throwing up good candidates, only a few here and there, because once through this imposition, they are not doing that. So primaries, we have to, all agencies, everybody who is involved in this have to ensure that party system in Nigeria is organized. They do their primaries properly. We bring in, at the moment, it's only primaries who can sponsor candidates. There's no reason why we shouldn't have an individual candidature. People should be able to, on the strength of their popularity, be able to go there and stand for elections. And I tell you, a lot of people will be voted, because I know some constituencies where the voters were extremely disenchanted by the candidates which the party threw up. So if you have independent candidature, make provision for it. That sort of thing can easily help. And again, the party system, can be reworked. There's no reason why we should have 93 political parties as we are having now, when in fact we have only 2 parties, in truth.
And that's
at most 5, but actually it's 2.
For another day, Professor Tahir Mamman, you have said it very well this morning. Vice Chancellor of the Baze University and former DG of the Nigerian Law School. Many thanks for sharing your thoughts on the concluded elections with us on Arise News, the morning show today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.